The Zephyr Coalition had ruled the galaxy with an iron grip for centuries. An alliance of the most advanced and powerful alien civilizations, the Coalition had effortlessly crushed any opposition that dared to challenge their dominance. To them, humanity was nothing more than a minor nuisance, a species whose reach barely extended beyond their home planet. Earth's influence, while growing, remained insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics. The Zephyr saw no threat in humanity, only another fledgling race attempting to carve out its place among the stars. Yet, in recent years, something had changed. Humanity had begun expanding beyond the safety of their star system, venturing into sectors controlled by the Coalition. They established outposts and colonies on the fringes of Zephyr territory, quietly extending their influence. At first, these expansions were dismissed as harmless. The Coalition believed it was only a matter of time before humanity would falter and realize the futility of their ambitions. But the humans persisted, building more colonies, strengthening their foothold in distant worlds, and continuing their audacious push into the unknown. What had begun as a minor irritation soon became an undeniable annoyance. The leaders of the Zephyr Coalition convened in the heart of their vast empire, a sprawling capital that served as a symbol of their superiority. In the grand halls of their council chambers, they discussed the growing human presence in their sectors. Some among them still believed humanity posed no real threat, that they would collapse under their own ambition. But others, those more attuned to the subtle shifts in power, sensed something more dangerous in the humans' determination. A decision was reached. The time had come to deal with humanity's overreach once and for all. They would launch a swift, decisive strike on a critical human outpost, a base that had become the nerve center of their operations in the contested regions. The Zephyr leaders anticipated no real resistance. After all, they had crushed countless species before, many of them far more advanced than humans. Victory was inevitable. Humanity would be reminded of their place in the galaxy beneath the heels of the Coalition. The massive war fleets were mobilized, and the Coalition prepared for what they believed would be a quick and overwhelming display of power. The Zephyr Coalition's fleet arrived in overwhelming force, blotting out the stars as their ships surrounded the small human outpost on the edge of their territory. The fleet, a vast armada of warships bristling with weapons, was a display of the Coalition's unmatched military might. The outpost, though heavily fortified, was insignificant in comparison to the firepower the Zephyr had brought to bear. From above, the human base appeared vulnerable, a tiny speck against the backdrop of the Coalition's immense war machines. The outpost had been a key part of humanity's recent expansion, a vital link in their operations across the contested sectors. The Coalition knew that seizing it would cripple human activities in the region. Confident in their superiority, the Zephyr commanders wasted no time in issuing their demands. A broadcast was sent to the outpost, its message sharp and clear: immediate surrender. The Coalition's fleet was far beyond anything the humans could hope to withstand. They expected a quick capitulation after all. This had been the fate of countless others before the humans. Surely humanity would recognize the futility of resistance and concede without a fight. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, no response came. The Coalition commanders, seated in the command decks of their towering ships, exchanged puzzled glances. They had anticipated a prompt reply, either surrender or a desperate plea for negotiation. Instead, there was only silence. The commanders, seasoned veterans of numerous campaigns, were momentarily taken aback. Was it a technical failure? Could the humans have missed the transmission? Not willing to let confusion fester, the Coalition sent a second broadcast, this one more aggressive, more impatient. They warned the humans that failure to respond would result in their immediate annihilation. Surely this would elicit a reaction. Yet, once again, there was nothing. The human outpost remained eerily silent, its defenses standing tall but unmoving. The Coalition commanders grew increasingly uneasy, uncertain whether they were facing a stubborn refusal or something else entirely. For the first time in a long while, the Zephyr found themselves unsure of their next move. In the heart of the human outpost, there was no panic, no talk of surrender. Soldiers moved with purpose, engineers checked and rechecked vital systems, and officers gathered around tactical maps, studying every possible strategy for holding the line. The calm inside the base was almost eerie, considering the overwhelming force surrounding them. But this wasn't a base filled with fear, it was filled with resolve. Every person there knew why they were fighting. Every action they took was deliberate, designed to strengthen their chances of survival. At the center of it all stood Captain Idris, a veteran commander who had seen his fair share of battles. His presence was steady, his demeanor composed, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Idris had known, long before the coalition fleet arrived, that this day might come. He had prepared his team for it, drilled them for weeks on end, not allowing anyone to forget the significance of the outpost they defended. It wasn't just a strategic location. It was a symbol of humanity's determination to expand, to survive in a galaxy that had never been kind to them. Gathering his officers, Idris surveyed their faces, each one reflecting the same grim determination he felt within himself. He spoke with quiet authority, reminding them of the importance of what lay ahead. "We've known this day would come," he said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared reality. "We're not just defending an outpost, we're defending our future. We hold this line or we fall." No one asked about reinforcements, because they all knew the truth. Help was days away, too far to be of any use in the coming battle. They were alone, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had crushed stronger forces than theirs. But none of that mattered now. Idris calmly issued his orders, making sure every detail was addressed. The shields were raised to maximum power, every turret was double-checked, and the soldiers took up their positions, prepared for the inevitable onslaught. The tension in the air was thick, but there was no hesitation. This was what they had trained for. Every person on that base knew what was at stake, and they were ready to stand firm, no matter the cost. Idris watched as his team moved into action, and he felt a deep sense of pride. They would fight, they would resist, and they would not go down easily. The first wave of the Zephyr assault began with calculated precision. Small groups of interceptors and drones moved in on the human outpost, probing the perimeter, searching for any sign of weakness. The Zephyr commanders had expected this to be a formality, a necessary but simple process before their inevitable victory. They had done this countless times before. Test the defenses, find the gaps, and exploit them. Yet, as their forces neared the outpost, something unexpected happened. The humans were ready. Well-placed turrets and artillery opened fire with exacting precision. The drones, small but fast, were picked off one by one, and the interceptors found themselves unable to get close without sustaining heavy damage. Every movement of the human defenses seemed coordinated, as if they knew exactly where to strike and how to counter each probe. The Zephyr commanders watched in growing frustration as their initial efforts were thwarted. Each attempt met with a level of resistance they had not anticipated. But the Zephyr were nothing if not relentless. Undeterred by the initial setback, they pressed forward, launching more drones, sending in more interceptors, determined to overwhelm the human defenses through sheer numbers. Yet every strike met with the same fate: resistance. The humans didn't falter, their response coldly efficient, their turrets unyielding. What the Zephyr had thought would be a swift unraveling of human defenses was turning into a stalemate. Frustration mounting, the Zephyr commanders shifted tactics. They knew how to play this game. If brute force couldn't break the humans, perhaps fear could. They launched a series of demoralizing strikes, firing volleys that landed just outside the outpost, causing explosions that sent shockwaves through the surrounding area. It was a show of power, intended to intimidate the defenders, to remind them of the overwhelming force they were up against. The Zephyr expected the humans to panic, to waste resources on a futile defense, or even begin to contemplate surrender. But inside the outpost, there was no panic, no wasteful retaliation. The humans held their ground, refusing to be baited by the psychological warfare being waged against them. The turrets stayed silent, conserving ammunition, and the shields held strong, absorbing the impact of the blasts. The Zephyr had hoped to provoke fear, to shake the humans' resolve, but they found no cracks in their enemy's composure. The Zephyr coalition, growing increasingly frustrated by the humans' refusal to crumble, gathered every available ship for a final, overwhelming strike. The commanders, having realized that their psychological tactics had failed, now sought to end the battle in one decisive push. There would be no more probing or intimidation. This time they would unleash the full might of their fleet to overwhelm the outpost once and for all. The command was given, and the coalition's warships surged forward, filling the space around the human outpost with blinding light as they opened fire. Missiles, plasma cannons, and energy beams all converged on the outpost in a single massive barrage. The sky above the outpost turned into a chaotic storm of explosions and debris as the human shields flared under the relentless onslaught. Inside the outpost, Captain Idris and his team worked frantically, coordinating the defense. The shields, though holding, were pushed to their limits. Sparks flew from overloaded systems as the engineers scrambled to keep the power flowing, risking their lives to repair critical generators even as the enemy's fire rained down around them. Every time a generator failed, a team of engineers rushed out, braving the chaos to restore power and keep the shields from collapsing. Meanwhile, the ground troops were setting traps, laying mines and explosives in strategic positions to counter any Zephyr attempt at a ground assault. Snipers took their positions, scanning the battlefield for key coalition officers and picking them off with deadly precision. Each shot was a small victory, slowing the enemy's advance and spreading confusion among their ranks. Above the chaos, the human artillery units were performing with unerring accuracy. They had been waiting for this moment, and now, with the coalition fleet fully committed, they unleashed everything they had. Mortar rounds and long-range artillery shells soared through the air, finding their marks on key coalition ships. The precise strikes turned the battlefield into chaos, with coalition vessels losing power, colliding with one another, or being torn apart by explosions. But even as the humans mounted their fierce defense, the cost was steep. On the front lines, soldiers made desperate last-ditch efforts to protect vital infrastructure, often throwing themselves into harm's way to stop the enemy from breaching the base's defenses. Some ran headlong into enemy fire to plant explosives or disable Zephyr machinery, knowing full well they might not return. Others held their positions against waves of enemy soldiers, refusing to give ground even as the odds stacked against them. Amidst the wreckage and fire, there were moments of pure bravery. A young engineer, barely out of training, sprinted across a courtyard under heavy fire to manually reconnect a power conduit, her hands shaking as she worked quickly to restore power to the failing shields. A sniper, perched high above the battlefield, waited in silence for the perfect moment, holding his breath as he lined up a shot on a coalition commander. He squeezed the trigger, and the commander fell, sending confusion through the enemy ranks. The battle dragged on, and the toll on the human defenders grew heavier by the minute. But no matter how many lives were lost, no matter how dire the situation became, the humans refused to falter. Captain Idris watched from the command center, his heart heavy with the weight of each loss. Yet through it all, he saw the determination in his team's eyes. They were battered, exhausted, but they stood firm, knowing what was at stake. As the coalition's assault began to falter, the final push of their fleet crumbled under the weight of human resistance. Ships that had once seemed invincible now retreated, trailing smoke and debris, their formations broken, their commanders defeated. The humans had held the line, but the cost had been high. When the last coalition ship disappeared into hyperspace, the battlefield was eerily quiet. The human outpost still stood, battered but unbroken. Captain Idris looked out over the wreckage, reflecting on the bravery and sacrifices that had made their victory possible. Victory had come at a great price, but humanity had proven, once again, that they would not be easily conquered. The Zephyr coalition, once so confident in their victory, had reached their breaking point. The prolonged battle had taken its toll. Their once mighty fleet, with ships spread out across the battlefield in an attempt to overwhelm the human defenses, was now in disarray. Smoke and debris filled the void where their most powerful vessels had once stood. Morale had crumbled, and the once unshakable commanders now faced an undeniable truth the humans had not broken. Instead, they had fought back with a tenacity and resilience the coalition had not anticipated. Reports of mounting losses flooded the coalition's command channel, ships destroyed, officers lost, equipment beyond repair. Their tactics had failed, and the enemy they had dismissed as weak had proven to be anything but. The final order was inevitable. With no other choice, the coalition commanders gave the signal to retreat. One by one, the surviving ships powered up their engines and began to pull away from the battlefield. It was a quiet, almost humbling moment as the Zephyr ships disappeared into the blackness of space, their defeat marked not by explosions but by the slow, reluctant retreat of a broken fleet. Inside the human outpost, the atmosphere was heavy with both exhaustion and relief. Captain Idris stood with his team, watching the retreating ships vanish into hyperspace. The outpost, though battered and scarred from the relentless assault, still stood. It had endured, just as they had. The silence that followed the battle was almost surreal, a stark contrast to the chaos and destruction that had filled the hours before. Idris allowed himself a moment of reflection, his thoughts heavy with the weight of the sacrifices made. He thought of the engineers who had risked everything to keep the shields operational, the soldiers who had fought against impossible odds, and the snipers whose precision had turned the tide. Victory had come, but it had not come easily. The cost was high, and Idris knew that this battle was only a small part of a larger, ongoing conflict. The Zephyr would not stop with this defeat. They would regroup, and there would be more battles to come. But for now, they had won. For now, they had proven their strength. With a deep breath, Idris turned to his communications officer. "Send a message," he said. The officer nodded and began typing out the transmission, one that would echo across the stars, reaching not only the coalition but every species watching this conflict unfold. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had fought for. Humanity doesn't bow. We stand. Always.